Okay, in this lesson for our Cornet project class, I'll call your attention to the diagrams that we did yesterday. We've introduced these before, specifically about the Trinity, but using them, for example, when we uh, notice the high level of energy and investment concerning time, the Bible doctrine of time, for example, when we had chronological and then the genealogical record in the Bible, which interdepends upon chronological, and then of course we had geological, and we noticed that we could take this same logic. There is a difference between geological and genealogical, obviously, chronological and geological, and then go the other direction. But all of these are time. Even genealogical is a record of the time and the veracity, especially when it speaks of Christ. And we noticed that if we took the data in the Bible, there's other videos, and I'll put a link to the video, A Rationale for Recent Earth Creation, for example, and then you can look at that. But when we took the delta, that triangle there, between there was assertions of 6 to 20,000 years in the young Earth chronological assertion, and that was a difference of 14,000. So we just simply took the difference of that, which is 7,000, and then began at 6,000. And by doing that, we just took the approximate 6,000, took it in 250-year increments, and that's at 12 hours per day. As Jesus said, there's 12 hours in the day. Well, then we just went and included the 12 hours night to get our 24 hours total. And some of you can do this and have done it now, just while you're talking with a friend over coffee. You can just write it out on a napkin at the table, and it'd be quite impressive enough. And then we multiplied this total, because then we noticed, well, let's just do this. 600, that gave us 12,500 years at 24 hours total. We multiplied it by a 360-day year. That gave us 4.5 million days. And then when we multiplied that times 1,000 years, it gave us 4.5 billion years. Now that was more easily synthesized, or the synthesis of it was more easily noticed, because we could use third grade arithmetic, and just by noticing 1 day to 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day being a ratio, we just took the inverse relationship, which is multiplication, and we could hammer that out. So that this view, like I always was curious about the critical thinking that was invested in developing the view of the Godhead according to the scriptures, one being, three persons, the true and living God. And you've seen it before, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and we've gone over that before, but that must have certainly required or called for, as the Bible invites us in this class, to participate from a view from which no contradiction appears. And before I move on, we remember we could take the 4.5 billion, which is years, billion years, and we notice we multiply it by 1,000 days. That days 2.78, approximately 2.78 years, 1,000 days is, and that equaled 12.5 billion. So we notice then that the geological age is definitely not the same as chronological. The genealogical reflects the chronological reality. That's referential time. That's only kind of which man is cognizant. We have no ability to experience otherwise. So I wanted to show you, let's transfer over here to the return, resurrection, and rapture. And I'm noticing now why the pre-trib rapture will just never go away, nor do I have some personal interest in it going away. I find those who are mostly attached to pre or post, and then others mid. Now, mid takes a lot more work, but when we notice, you all have, that few want to dialogue and engage in collaboration. Either it's because they have no interest in the topic, or they have, because of no interest, nothing to say about it except to just simply say which they prefer, which is fine. And you remember we learned here, Jesus said, I myself, and then he used that word meta, which in this text is, in this spelling here, it was in association with you all. He said, I myself am, that's ego eimi. So he said, I myself am in association with you all. And that was until the end of the age. 1 Thessalonians 4:17, we had the two prepositions seen and ama. And that was the word seen is together with, and then ama was the adverb simultaneously. And that was always the deal breaker for me, because I could not understand how that's all one event, how you break it apart. And that's when I learned Dr. J.R. Graves mentioned two aspects. Dr. Robert N. Wilkin mentioned two phases. I recently found an old theology textbook by Thiessen. They're very inexpensive when you find them at used bookstores, things like that. So he spoke of different phases as well. And I was really struck by that, because that's not a solution that I would have ever noticed. And then, of course, 1 Thessalonians 2:13, you all remember that it says, eleto hemos, Paul speaking to them, that the God, ho theos, the God preferred you all for himself away from, of course, Omicron's drop because of the next word, away from arches, beginning, and that was in the letters to the first and second Thessalonian letters to Thessalonica, was speaking of Philip's eos, tribulation, and not as imported through eisegesis, kateseos, creation. So here's what some prefer, pun intended. We prefer it, so we insert it, but we don't have that mentioned in either of the letters. So away from beginning of tribulation. Again, this is why I say pre-trib won't go away, because these are actual data points for a rationale. I'm still looking for the deal breaker. And then, of course, in Matthew 24:29, you theos immediately, but immediately, and then we had this meta in association with it. It's often translated to, and then often taught to mean when it's completely over, and that's where the word post-trib comes from. But immediately in association with tain thlipsane. No, thlipsane, I think that's what it is. Yeah. So in association with the tribulation, and then 1 Corinthians 15:52, this said in te, this is the text for last trump, escate. Let me see if I can, there we go. So in the last trump, and then I went and noticed at a website called gotquestions.org, they actually made a chart comparing 1 Thessalonians with 1 Corinthians 15, how they correlate. Then us being language students, we went to this adjective. First, let me write some of this out up here. He said, I myself, you remember when it's an independent use of a personal pronoun, and then this is in association with you all, I am, of course, it's repeated, I am. And then, of course, there's together with and simultaneously, Thessalonians, the God, away from I'll have to get a bigger board. Beginning, there we go. And then that's tribulation. Beginning of tribulation, you all and preferred, the God preferred for himself. Now, that's aorist, so it's also just prefers. The God prefers you all for himself away from beginning of tribulation. So that's with his interest. So immediately, this is what we had in Matthew 24. But immediately, and then in association with the tribulation. And it speaks of the tribulation of those days. And then, of course, in the last trump. Interesting, I went to work on this because several of you have been trying to help me with the rapture, and I'm glad because your feedback's been very helpful, and especially there at the church house where we talked about it. But the last trump doesn't even appear in the book of Revelation, which is written much later. And then this term here speaks of the end of something, not necessarily in a series like the seventh angel sounded in the book of Revelation, but not the praise last. Now, I'll just tell you, when you start studying like this and you go to a term, and this is an adjective, so the attribute of this trump that tells us what this trump is about is the end, and this is where the end of what? Age of churches. And again, this is just showing you that when you set this here and you synthesize it and you use the terms that are usually and often referred to by post and pre and mid-tribulation advocates alike, which to us, we don't begin by preferring a camp, except it's hard not to. All I was ever taught was pre-trib. All I ever agreed to at the church I pastor was to notice and evaluate the rationale for it. Now, most people, of course, like myself, I never had a rationale, except I would say, this is what I was taught. Now, after about 6 months, that doesn't work anymore. It's time to either move on or get involved in collaborative reasoning and collective learning, or just be content that you don't have an interest in defending your preferred position, which is fine. So here we go. This is it. And I know it's busy. Let me look and make sure I spelled some of this correctly. Here's the chart there's a chart at gotquestions.org. I'll put the link to that. And, well, I can't read my writing any better than I can. I'm just not sure. I've got a question here, but I'll look it up later and you can check it out. So that was it. But that's exactly, again, this is a good use of this diagram. The resurrection is not the same as the rapture, is not the same as the return. The return occurs, resurrection's first, then we which are alive and remain will be simultaneously seized together with them. Again, I found everyone from J.R. Graves, and then a modern contemporary Dr. Wilkin, and then I can't spell Thiessen's name, but theologian Thiessen, and he's was quite an author and a defender of what he considered the position on this eschatology. But there it is. It's just those two diagrams again. But if you want to know what makes this so formidable, is apparently there's been so much work on this that my only interest now is to receive more feedback, especially from post-trib advocates and the research they've done on last trump, and then why and how do you equate that with the seventh angel sounding. Now, it's very logical. A rational person would say, well, of course, the last trump is the seventh one is the end, and this is it. So they've got good rationale. Now, language is what we're doing. This is when you look it up at blueletterbible.org or in your Greek lexicon, it is not necessarily it can be last in time and not in a series. And obviously, Paul hadn't spoken to the church in Corinth about previous 6 trumps that must first take place and then the last. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson.